Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this beautiful day. Regardless of what the weather is, wherever we are, you're in it and you're with us. And we just ask that you would bless us today with being able to hear what you want to teach us and what you want to say. We ask, Lord God, that you would still our hearts and minds, that we could be quiet and that we could hear your voice, whether you speak to us physically or inside or through our hearts or spirits. Lord, we just open ourselves to receive from you today. Help us to put aside every concern, every anxiety, all of the things that pursue us in this world. And we ask all this in your name, Jesus. Amen. And amen. So last week we kind of touched on it was the beginning of the trauma series, because usually when I'm teaching counselor training, I'll usually go through a pretty major developmental stages teaching. And I'm not doing that this time. We just did basically the first year because I felt it was really important in terms of trauma to understand how it starts in the womb, and that it builds on that, and that it also ties in again with identity, and you can't separate these things. But let's talk about, trauma is a kind of a buzzword these days. It's kind of like you didn't used to hear, there wasn't even a term for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, for many, many years. Back in the days of World War I, World War II, they referred to it as shell shock. And they related it just to combat warriors or combat soldiers. And then through Vietnam, we had so many of our soldiers coming home with all these symptoms, and they developed a category that they called post-traumatic stress disorder. And then it evolved from there to understand that this wasn't just about soldiers. It wasn't just about war. And so trauma has evolved into a much more expansive definition than what we used to think of as trauma. So bottom line, trauma is anything that is outside of our normal or healthy life experiences, that when our nervous system, we are exposed to something that is overwhelming and we have no control, that is trauma. And we'll go into the specifics of that. And those of you that have been in my classes a lot know that I often give a trigger warning. And I'm going to remind you again that this material can be very triggering. And in fact, I don't know that we have a class that isn't. Everything we talk about touches on something that we're familiar with in a way that has often been scary to us. And I have come to I think I coined this phrase myself. I don't even have to, I'm not plagiarizing. Triggers are my friend. That if you're not triggered, you will never get over whatever it is that has traumatized you. If you're not triggered, it runs undercurrent in your body, and you experience anxiety, sometimes panic attacks, sometimes it comes out in many, many ways, but you don't make a conscious connection to the physical manifestation of it in your body, to the emotions. We often actually degrade ourselves. If I'm starting to feel anxiety and I look around and it's like, well, there's nothing to be anxious about. I'm so stupid. What's wrong with me? Why can't I get over this? I remember looking in the mirror many, many times through the years and going, Cindy, just stop it. What's wrong with you? And probably some of you can identify with that you get so aggravated with, I'm a grown up. I should be able to handle this. There's nothing here to be afraid of. And yet my body's trembling. My breath is short. I'm having panic attacks or whatever. And so then I chastise myself for it, rather than what we're going to really, really work on is just noticing. In trauma therapy, they say those are the two most important words in all of trauma therapy. Just notice. Sounds really simple, doesn't it? But it takes concerted effort and practice to just notice, oh, I'm trembling inside. You may not see it on the outside, but I'm quivering, oh, my throat's constricted. Oh, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm sweating, or I'm, all of these different things that I'm experiencing. To just notice it without judgment. That is a critical factor. A couple years ago, my sister-in-law was going, her and her daughter were, it was about this time of year, because they were had been out doing some Christmas shopping and stuff, and it was raining hard, and they live in the Olympia, Washington area. And so my niece, put her hood up and ran across the street, and her mom started to follow her, and her mom stepped off a curb, and a car comes around the corner and hit her. And she goes, and Jackie turned around just in time to see her mother hit, see her flying through the air, see her hit the ground. For all she knew, she was dead. And Linda was knocked out, but she also had broken her pelvis, she broke her knee, she had some pretty serious injuries. But in visiting with, I was able to get hold of Jackie and talk to her right afterwards, or within a few days, and she was already just being absolutely tormented with the video going through her head over and over and over, and seeing this happen to her mom and going, it was my fault. I should have waited. I should have, if I hadn't gone across first, then she would have, all those things that happen in trauma. We blame ourselves. And I shared a little bit with her, but I told her, I said, the most important thing I want you to do is to just notice what you're feeling and the thoughts that are going through your head, and don't analyze it. Don't try to fix it. Don't judge it. And that was really about all the advice I gave her, because we were on the phone and there wasn't a lot I could do. But she called me a few days later and she says, oh my gosh, I cannot believe how much that helped me to stop judging my thoughts. So that's something I want to emphasize over and over and over. Notice when you are judging your thoughts. It's so automatic that you don't even know you're doing it. It's so much of your routine that those condemning thoughts go through your brain constantly, and you're really not even aware of it, or you're not aware that it is damaging you. And so this is, if you want to go back to the teachings we did on spiritual warfare, this is catching those thoughts and taking them captive to Christ. So you have a negative thought about what just happened. Oh, I shouldn't have gone across the street first. I'm so stupid. I'm so selfish. What if I could have helped? So I could have avoided this, And it's like, stop. pause, take a deep breath, and just notice I'm having condemning thoughts. Lord, here's my thoughts. I'm thinking this was my fault. What do you say? And that's just a starting place. So trauma, one of the things that they do say that I've gone through Peter Levine's training at the Trauma Healing Institute. And so a lot of the materials that I use are from that. And a lot of the quotes that I'll use are from Peter Levine. Peter Levine is not a Christian. In fact, he's got some pretty far out spiritual beliefs. But I'm of the ilk that the science, man can discover anything that God has created that is in God's kingdom, that is of the kingdom of heaven. Satan can only distort it. He is not a creator. Satan can never create anything new. And so he can take hold of what is and try to pervert it and distort it. That's the very thing he did in the Garden of Eden, is he took the truth and he perverted it. Did God say? Makes us that we want to question God's goodness. Heather, I see your hand up.
Yes, just finishing my notes there, pervert creation. Yeah, and remembering. Let's see. Yes. The first time you said triggers are my friends, I was like, girl, you crazy. Well, it's like, how can triggers be your friends? I did not get that at all. And I'm starting to come around to that. And as I've had lots of triggers recently, and why I think they're my friends is because I've noticed when they're happening now. I'm like, oh, every time I go to the doctor's office or every time this happens. And so making them my friend helps me go, oh, this is something, oh, I get to work on this now. Now I'm helping, it's giving me information.
Yeah.
I still am not very good about not judging. Like I'm sitting there, I'm like, why? This is so stupid. Why am I freaking out in a doctor's office? This is the dumbest thing ever. Like, I'm a 50-year-old woman.
Yeah.
What's wrong with this?
Yeah, that's exactly
Anyway.
the pattern I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
so I'm working on that.
thanks for that clarification and an example. I think it's good that we understand why it's our friend. It's because it tells us, it's a flag that says, yoo-hoo, something's not finished here. But what we tend to do is when we get triggered, we go into fear and anxiety and condemnation and shame and guilt and all of those things. When in reality, the trigger is there to tell us that we need to finish something. There's something there that is still negative energy that was created from the trauma. And so some of what Peter Levine says is that trauma is the most avoided, ignored, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering. And I think we can all identify with that, Maggie.
And it isn't just that one trauma. It's every time we play it out, it attaches more the neutrons in its nuts, and it creates this path that seems to be the prevailing path, and it goes through. I mean, it's caused me physical ailments, and my brain was always thinking, so everybody's out to get me, and it creates so much more than just what the event created. It grows out of it until you get some healing.
Yeah. One thing builds on the next, and later we'll talk about, maybe not today, but later in training, about global triggering. And so we get triggered by something that happened, something happened very early in life. Let's say we're were just a toddler. And then a little bit later, something similar that has some of the same sensory stimulus in it happens. And so that original trigger plugs into the next trigger, and then there's more triggers within that second event. And then our body is constantly scanning, our brain is constantly scanning for danger and safety. And so if it detects danger, it sets off alarms and says, danger, warning, run, flee, hide, fight. And so there gets to be kind of a path of all of these things that happen inside of us. And all of those triggers connect together. And so then it's hard to go back and identify one event that started all of it, because there's so many events connected to it.
Is our brain also always looking for patterns? So if we see something that's starting a pattern, we go ding, 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 ding. This is going to lead this way. So that's
Yeah.
why we're also searching for patterns, because, okay, if this happens, then this should happen next, and then this should happen next. So it all kind of gets put together.
Yeah, and this is the primitive warning system of our brain, and it's a beautiful thing. It's something that God created in us to keep us safe. You know, back before we had all of the modern conveniences, and all of our food had to be, you know, hunter gatherer out in the forest, and we were in danger. There was a good thing, and there's still times when that fight or flight system is triggered in us, and it's appropriate and it's good. We need to fight, we need to run. There's danger, there's real danger. But the problem is that we never finish, our body never gets to complete that cycle. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. I want to give you a little bit more about the definitions of trauma. It doesn't reside in the event itself, and I think Maggie alluded to that. It's not, the trauma isn't the pain, it's not the thing that happened, but it's getting stuck in those primitive responses of fight or flight, and not being able to complete that cycle and let the energy from that experience release from our bodies. It's kind of interesting that animals in the wild do not get PTSD. Isn't that fascinating? Animals in captivity do. Animals in the wild are able to, they either die or they escape. One or the other. And if they escape, their body has been able to process all of the chemicals that are poured into it through the fight or flight, and able to release that and come back into balance or homeostasis, and then go on with life. We get stuck in that we're triggered, we have a traumatic event, and then we're trapped. We can't run, we can't fight. And so we go into freeze, and that's where we get stuck. So we'll talk about that a little more in detail. So trauma is caused when we're unable to release blocked energies, to fully move through the physical, emotional reactions to a hurtful experience. And we'll look at some ways that happens and how we can work through that. So it's not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. So an empathetic witness is someone who comes alongside you and sees your pain, sees your stress, sees your trauma, and is able to hold you and comfort you, reassure you, help put you back on your feet. And there's no condemnation, no shame. And to me, that's what counseling is about. It's becoming that empathetic witness for others, that we witness other people's pain without condemnation or shame, and we help them to see that experience with a different perspective. Trauma is not a disease, but rather a human experience rooted in survival instinct. So it's not anything we can control. We can't say, oh, well, I'm not gonna feel that. That instantaneously, when something traumatic, something that is overwhelming to our body, our mind, our emotions, instantaneously, I mean nanoseconds, we get hijacked. And we can't say, oh, I don't think I'll do that, because it takes over us. Now, we can begin to recognize when that happens, and especially when it is not not in the actual trauma, but when we are being triggered by something that has happened in the past, we can begin to, in a sense, step back and begin looking at it from a different perspective and understand that we are triggered and that there is no real danger. But that also takes it takes great body awareness. And so those of you that have been in my classes or counseled with me, you know that there's a huge focus on body awareness. And that really is what I'm seeing as the key to the healing, is that our Western culture, especially, and I think a lot of cultures, and we all have cultures within cultures. It may be our family culture, it may be our church culture, it might be our community culture, it might be if you live on the West Coast or the East Coast or down south, or in some other country, that we have a myriad of cultures, and we may have a specific circle around us that shames any type of emotional response. And we see emotion often as weakness. So I'm not allowed to process through what I have just experienced. How many of you have either yourself or been in a situation where you observe others and they've had maybe a death, a traumatic death or loss? Just a second, just to allow it. What's it say? If somebody's trying to sign in.
That's me.
Oh, okay. So
I'm sending Crystal a link in the background.
Okay. So good thing we didn't deny it.
Thank you. Thanks. I might need to do it again, so just ignore that on that end. Just doing techie stuff in the background.
Okay, so now I forgot where I'm at. Trauma is a fact of life is something that Peter Levine says. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence. So more than anything, I want to encourage you that there's hope that we can recover from these things. I could give a whole lot of testimony about recovery from trauma, and most of it has come when I've least expected it, because it's come when I've been highly triggered by something, and then learning, through this process of understanding how to connect with the energy that still resides in my body from prior experiences. And so today, though, we're just going to talk about, the next thing I want to look at is the types of trauma. That there's event trauma. And so event trauma would be things like natural disasters, accidents, assault, things that happen to us, that come to us, a one-time event. So it's not something that, this would not be abuse that is experienced over and over and over. It might be a one-time assault or something like that. So an automobile accident, even minor fender benders. We don't understand how traumatic that is to our system. And while I'm saying these things, I want you to notice any shift, any little changes in your physical body, your physical sensations when I say these things. Like first of all, automobile accidents. Just notice, is there any reactivity in your body? Routine invasive medical procedures. It might be dental procedures. It may have been a surgery or a broken arm or some type of medical thing. What? Just notice, just even saying it or talking about it, you feel it in your body. Of course, loss of a loved one, a death, is an event that is very traumatic. And then depending on whether that death was what I call simple or complex. Simple is when somebody is old and they die of natural causes and what's expected. Complex are tragedy, accidents, um, things that are unexpected, and suicide. Those are very complex types of death and will have a much more traumatic impact on us. Natural disasters such as earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, those type of things. Non-vehicular accidents. So falls, could just be tripping and falling or falling off of something where there's some kind of high impact. So as I spoke down through those, just kind of make a note of where you felt a shift or a change or some discomfort in you when that happened, when I said that. And then there is developmental trauma. And so developmental trauma is more complex. It's personal, it's intentional, and it's ongoing. So things like domestic violence, abandonment, neglect, sexual abuse, being bullied or shamed or embarrassed repeatedly. War would be in that realm of developmental trauma because it's ongoing and usually many different traumatic aspects of it, from loss of human life to loss of possessions and community and all the changes that take place in war. Very complex. Severe childhood emotional abuse and adult emotional abuse, but often adult emotional abuse stems out of having been in that realm as a child, that we have developed in an atmosphere that says this is normal to be treated like this. And so then we carry the shame and the humiliation of what others have done to us. And we don't know any different. Nobody's told us that it was wrong. And so often when we're in the middle of a situation like that, we're actually told the opposite. We're told it's your fault that I had to do this to you, or that type of thing. Neglect, betrayal, abandonment during childhood, those are all developmental trauma. Experiencing or witnessing violence. So if you've been a witness of, say you're in a family where the father is beating the mother, but he never lays a hand on you yourself, you're still traumatized by witnessing the abuse of others. Of course, rape can be recurring. Partly because it sets you up then, makes you vulnerable to attack by others. And then catastrophic injuries and prolonged illnesses. Those are all in that realm of ongoing trauma, something that's repeated over and over and over. And it's our normal. And also, though, that trauma does not have to stem from a major catastrophe. In fact, people can be traumatized by an event they perceive, either consciously or unconsciously, to be life-threatening. So anytime, whether it's really life-threatening or not, doesn't matter. Your amygdala, your primitive brain can't tell the difference. It simply gathers the information and then interprets it according to past experience. And so this is where I said that it's our perception of what happens more than what actually happened. There may have been an initiating event that was actual trauma. I'm trying to think of of an example of let's say there's a situation where you and a sibling have been abused or being abused in some way. And the reality is you had no way of protecting yourself or your sibling. For one thing, that, in the situation that the person is bigger, more powerful, intimidating, has probably groomed or set you up or set both of you up for what is happening. And yet your perception is that it's my fault. I should have stopped this. I should have protected my sibling. I could have, so all of these things, our perception is, I was weak. I didn't do anything. I'm bad. And so we get stuck in that traumatic mentality. And so the difference between trauma and other types of hurt or loss. Now, there are other types of hurt or loss where we don't get trapped in that cycle, in that trauma cycle. But in order for the PTSD or post-trauma to occur in us, the event has to be perceived as life-threatening, whether it was or not. If you perceive that it was life-threatening, and a sense of being trapped. I can't escape. I can't get out of this. I have no control. That is the primary setup for post-traumatic stress. Are there any questions about that?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Complex post-traumatic stress, will you be talking about differences, or what are your views on that? Do you want to talk about that later?
Not today. I just touched on that, though, the difference between event trauma and developmental trauma or ongoing trauma. That's where complex PTSD is sourced. It's out of repeated and ongoing trauma. So a one-time event trauma, we can often work through with an empathetic witness or a counselor or somebody who can come alongside of us, and we can process through that one event. And there may be layers to that. But when we have had, especially months, years, decades of ongoing trauma, that becomes complex. And this is where I alluded to the global triggering, how one event triggers another event, another event, another event. And we get such a pile of triggers that we can't process through them. So
Thank
that's
you.
just kind of touching on the difference between complex. So Heather.
Yeah, I don't know if we're getting too much into the weeds, but I'm trying to, I feel like I'm almost grasping it, but not quite there. Um, so like global triggering, meaning so I'm having trigger trauma experiences in doctor's office. And so in my mind, as a counselor, I try to put my counselor brain on to be aware of my body and process. And then I want to heal it. So I'm like, well, how do I heal this so it doesn't happen again? So I'm like, I guess I'm wondering, is there a way to connect a specific triggering to a specific trauma? Or that's kind of just where Jesus comes in and figures it out. Jesus and the counselor and the intercessor of some sort.
Well,
That makes sense?
the triggering is always connected to specific trauma. The thing is it might be multiple specific traumas. And so
Right.
untangling that web is where we are so blessed to have the Holy Spirit. We are blessed to have the Lord be able to guide us through that process, that it can take it. It's that whole thing of it comes off in layers, and the Lord knows which layer is next, and we don't. I find though often, you know, going into inner healing and processing through an event, that when you just have to trust whatever event comes to your mind when you're going through that process, and work with that, and you'll find that within that one event, often represents the same dynamics as many other times that this has happened. So what I have seen and experienced myself is that the Lord will often bring some key events that represent the whole global thing, all of the stuff that happened. And that as we process through those key events, all of it begins to settle down. All of it begins to release.
Okay.
Maggie.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So what about the events that you don't have memories of? That it's locked, your brain has locked it in and it won't let you have the memories. Or maybe
So
that it gives one.
we blocked memories.
Yes.
That's fascinating because God's able to work with that. I always tell people to relax and don't ever try to dredge up memories. Let them come as the Lord leads you to them, because he knows the order that they need to be dealt with. And that if we try to dredge things up, we get anxious about it, and we're trying to figure it out, and we're trying to identify things. I just encourage you to rest in it. That when we do a case study, a life history, and we begin to look at those things, you're going to be triggered just talking about some of them. And that's where I encourage you, just notice, that was triggering. But as counselors, we go through, we look at all those triggering events, and we say, okay, Lord, where do you want to start? And you just trust that there may be something that comes to you that it's like, well, that was silly, that's insignificant. And yet, trust. If that's what came to you, that's where the Lord wants to take you first. Maybe that thing that seemed insignificant to you has to be cleared out before you can get to the next thing. And so there's not any neat, clean roadmap, and it is very much dependent upon the leading of the Holy Spirit. Hannah, I see your hand raised.
Thank you so much, Mama Cindy. I just wanted to to say something about triggers. Yeah, what has helped me when I have some trauma triggers, I keep asking myself some questions to understand what is really happening, and I develop a plan for how I can go about it or take care of. Like, for example, I ask myself what is going on in my body. I sense it. I see the type of situation I'm in. What is happening around me? What thoughts am I experiencing? And yeah, when I ask myself those questions, I go on writing down the answers and I keep tracking the experiences. So this has helped me to get better and also to understand my triggers. So
Yeah.
you can go on if you're triggered in any way and you ask yourself some of these questions. What are the feelings? Are these feelings familiar? What does this remind me of? So all those kind of things have really helped with the triggers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Hannah. So that's a great
Welcome.
example of just noticing. She's noticing what's happening in her physiology. And I think that's one place I started to go and I kind of got sidetracked or lost is that once we notice what is happening to us physically, it's fascinating how that always ties to an emotion and it always ties to a thought or a belief. You cannot separate those three things. If you're having a thought, your body is having a physical reaction to that thought. And you're also having an emotion related to that thought. It may be a benign emotion, it may be a pleasant emotion, it may be a traumatic emotion. But it is fascinating how once we recognize what's in our physiology, I can notice when my shoulders are up around my ears. I can notice when I'm holding my breath. I can notice when my heart is racing. I can notice if I'm clenching my jaw. And if I start by dropping my shoulders, breathing down into my belly, and I want to say that breathing, we can minimize that, but it's very, very important that we breathe. And I think we don't know how often we catch our breath. We hold our breath when we're tense. But do a body scan every once in a while. Notice where you're holding tension. I find it interesting how often I'll be standing at the kitchen counter fixing a meal or something and my butt cheeks are clenched. It's like, well, that's what. And it's like, well, no wonder my low back hurts. But it's interesting that once you release that muscle, then the thoughts and the emotions resolve with it. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to even do anything a lot of times. Hannah, your hand is still up. Did you have more to say? I was working with a police officer one time who had many traumatic experiences, and he was retired now. And I was teaching him some of this stuff and helping him notice what was happening in his body in certain situations. And he said, here he is, a cop, and he says, one of my biggest problems is road rage. He says, man, when somebody cuts me off in traffic or does some stupid thing that I don't approve of, he says, I just immediately want to start raging and flipping them off and doing all kinds of naughty things. And so I said, okay, you're talking about that right now. Notice what's going on in your body. And he said, well, I got my teeth clenched. And he says, my hands are in fists. And he says, and my chest is tight. And he was noticing all of these things. And I said, okay, so we just kind of enacted. I said, okay, put your hands on the steering wheel. And we imagined this happening. And I said, had him relax his jaw, relax his hands, drop his shoulders, take a deep breath. And he was just amazed at all of a sudden the rage was gone. It wasn't there anymore. So he is he's gone, comes back in the next week or so for counseling again, and he says, it happened. And I'm going, tell me more. So he said he actually experienced that. He said, this dude cuts me off, and I just instantaneously go into the rage. And then he says, then I heard your voice. And you said, relax your jaw, relax your hands, drop your shoulders, take a deep breath. And he says, it was gone. I wasn't mad at him anymore. So I love that example because it was such an example of how immediately addressing our physiology can affect our thoughts and our emotions. So let's talk a little bit about the physiology of trauma, and I'm going to share some slides here. This has changed since I used it last, so hold on a minute. You used to have to click some things if you wanted to show a video, so I don't know. Hopefully. Now I got all these drop downs that are hiding what I need to get to. Okay, I did it. So this is actually a handout that I put together. I might go back a couple of slides though, because I want to talk about the autonomic nervous system. So autonomic, I always think of the word automatic. That there's two parts to this, or two branches to this part of our nervous system. And it's what regulates the automatic responses in our body, so that we don't have to think, okay, breathe, heartbeat. We don't have to run all those things. Our body does that on its own, thank God. But there are two parts, and they call it the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. To me, it doesn't make much sense that the sympathetic nervous system is what speeds us up. The sympathetic nervous system is what is engaged when we experience it. It's anytime that we're activated and like when you're motivated to do something and you have energy and you feel life, your sympathetic nervous system is engaged at a healthy level, and you can do the things that you need to do. But when something traumatic happens, this sympathetic nervous system gets engaged to a level that, in a sense, goes out of control. It goes into the fight or flight response, and it begins to affect all of these organs in our body: our breathing, our heart, our saliva, our vision, our stomach, all of these things, adrenaline, all of the hormones. When we are triggered into something that says run, flee, fight, hide, this is the part of our nervous system that is engaged, the sympathetic nervous system. Think of it as the gas pedal on the car. It speeds us up. The parasympathetic, I always think of a parachute letting us down gently. The parasympathetic is what slows us down. So think of that as the brake. And so when the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, it begins to bleed off all of this adrenaline and the stress chemicals that are going through our body, and it strives to bring us back into balance and homeostasis. And so it begins to slow these things down now where we've been hyped up. This picture is just kind of gives you an idea of when that fight or flight response happens, when there's suddenly something from our sensory stimulus, our sight, our smell, sound, touch, when there's something there, say in this case, the guy sees something, it bypasses the thinking part of our brain, which is here. And this is part of why we get stuck, is because when a traumatic thing happens, it comes in and it registers immediately here in this primitive fight or flight part of our brain. And the job of the amygdala is actually to shut down the thinking brain. So we have no prefrontal cortex out at that time, that when that information comes in, it registers here and it tells us, it begins engaging all of these responses in our nervous system that shut down certain things, open up other things, like we'll go through this list here. In fact, here's a cute little video that I like. And again, I'm hoping I didn't see anything that told me that I had to click something else on this one. But so if you can't hear this, raise your hand, okay?
Humans, like all species, have self-protective mechanisms to help us survive. Our fight, flight, or freeze survival response, the FFF for short, is designed to mobilize our brain and body to fight an enemy, run from an avalanche, or freeze to hide from a predator. Our brain sometimes misinterprets safe situations as dangerous and can set off false alarms. When the amygdala, our brain's watchdog, senses and barks danger, our body enters survival mode quicker than our rational mind can react, leaving it trying to figure out why we feel in mortal danger. When the FFF alarm is sounded, we start to breathe more quickly and shallow, causing hyperventilation, and our heart starts beating very fast. These changes can cause strong chest pain, which many people interpret as symptoms of a heart attack, when in fact it's just a result of the FFF activation, which can be relieved through breathing exercises. As a way of getting you ready for action, blood is diverted towards the major muscle groups. Blood flows away from our digestive system, causing the bladder to relax, and we might feel the need to pee. The mouth goes dry, nausea can occur, and we get the butterflies feeling in our stomach. Blood also rushes from extremities, leaving us with cold hands, but often sweaty palms as the action-ready body starts sweating to avoid overheating. Legs and hands can start trembling and feel weak, while tension starts building in big muscles like the thighs, neck, and shoulders. In our head, FFF alarms cause our brain to focus on negative memories, probably so it can scan them to avoid danger and negative outcomes. We get tunnel vision as our pupils dilate to increase our focus and long vision, but as a result, we lose our peripheral vision. FFF activation also reduces our ability to recognize differences in facial expressions. Too much oxygen and too little CO2 can result in dizziness or lightheadedness, which many people interpret as signs that they might faint. But because fainting is caused by a drastic drop in blood pressure, and because the FFF increases both our heart rate and blood pressure, it's nearly impossible to faint when this happens. Over time, depression, anxiety, and high levels of stress all harm the brain's ability to slow or cancel false FFF activations, causing them to happen more often. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects. At Tanky Boxing, you can learn both bottom-up and top-down techniques to reduce false FFF activation and bring your body back to balance.
So if you want a copy of that, go to this Tankaboxen, and I think you can even go like just Google Tankaboxen and it'll come up, and you can probably get a copy of this. I downloaded it, so I don't have the the address right there. So, actually, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. And so, what did you see in there, or was there something that was maybe new to you, or helped you understand something? It goes pretty fast, but it tells you all of these things are happening, and you can't control them.
Facial
Sabrina.
expressions.
That was going to be
You can't see
my,
facial expression.
that was going to be one of mine. And Heather, you that was one of mine. Facial expressions, that we lose the ability to recognize facial expressions when we are in fight or flight. And it reminds me of my early marriage days when I was learning how to communicate in conflict with somebody who was safe, my husband. And in my previous marriage, it wasn't safe for the majority of our marriage, especially towards the end. It got very unsafe. And as I was communicating in conflict with Mark, that just brought up a memory, that losing my ability to recognize his facial, as he's talking to me, he has a calm body language, his calm facial expressions, and that would be very soothing to me. But because I have a trauma response, or I had a trauma response in those early conflict times, I couldn't even see that he was calm in his face, at his body language, his face. I didn't even look at his face. I just was afraid. And I imagine that can be really something beautiful as we're communicating in healthy situations, as we see people smile and mirror a calm demeanor in communication or even in conflict. It can help us through. But if we're in a trauma mode, we may miss those subtle things. Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things in that little video clip that's worth going back and and looking at more intensely. Just like, feeling like you have to pee. That can be part of the trauma response. I was working with a combat veteran one time, and he says, "Oh yeah," he says, anytime we'd go back, he says, "That's just go into combat." He says, "That's just something that was a given. Pretty much all of us had come back having peed our pants." And it was just known and understood, and they didn't make a big deal out of it because they knew it would happen. And it happened to all of them involuntarily. Yeah, so the peripheral vision, I thought that was interesting, that your vision narrows and and so you lose this out here, you lose a lot of other things that are going on around you, and because all you can see is this.
Can I say
There's
one more thing, Cindy?
Yeah.
The flip side of this is the beauty of how God created us. If we needed to flee a very dangerous situation, we
Yes.
will have all the blood to our extremities. We will not focus on the details, and we will be able to tunnel vision and get to safety.
And I think I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something we have to keep remembering, is that this natural response is not something that was meant to be to our detriment. It is meant to energize us and prepare us when we are in real danger. And the problem comes is because we are get into an experience where we are trapped. I can't fight, I can't flee, and so then I'm stuck with this. I'm gonna bring up my part here. Nope, that wasn't. Well, I guess it's on here too. There we go. Wait, there we go. Okay, so this is a chart that I put together to kind of explain the fight or flight response. And so if we look at this wide blue ribbon, we could call that the river of life. That's where we want to live. We want our nervous system to stay within this wide blue ribbon. And so that means every day we have to go into some type of sympathetic activation, or we won't get anything done. You know, whether it's just going grocery shopping or finishing some kind of task, we get activated enough that we accomplish the task. I finished that. I can check that off my list and my body regulates again. Now, it'll never be as neat and clean as this, but you know, we might have some activation and we work for a while and then it comes back down here. And then we're activated again and we come back down. And so you see this sympathetic and parasympathetic are working together to keep us in balance. And so when we're within this blue ribbon there, that's where what they call we're socially engaged. We're connected and aware of ourselves, our environment. We feel safe. That's where we can experience joy. We're grounded. We have curiosity, openness. We're present with the people around us. We're connected to the work that we're doing with our hands. And so that's what this wide blue ribbon would represent. And then the darker blue thread through there is just the activation and deactivation that we go through every day in a healthy way, or that we need to. But some of us live up here. And so this red line, of course, the big yellow lightning bolt is representative of either a significant trauma that is happening, or a trigger to something that has happened in the past. So let's say there comes a sight, a smell, a sound, something that triggers me into something that was traumatic in the past. My sympathetic nervous system is going to engage. And when it goes above this line, that's when I go into fight or flight. And so you can usually feel that as an intense energy inside of your body. And you're going to be all those physiological changes that we just watched in that video. Your heart rate increases, your breath gets shallow, you may sweat, you may have sweaty palms, but your hands are cold. Your digestion, often your gut will hurt, your muscles tense, your vision will change. It feels like brain fog when you can't think straight, and you feel confused and disoriented. And typically we will, depending on our personality, we will lean one way or the other towards fight or flight. I'm more of a flight person, but I can go into fight. And you can tell by if you're in flight, that's where you feel anxiety and fear and panic, worry, concern. So if you're constantly ruminating and worrying over something, you're in the flight mode. You've got your sympathetic nervous system engaged, because if you think about it, when you're feeling these things, what are you feeling in your body? Your body is going to have tension. It's going to often have pain, sometimes a knot in your gut, restriction in your chest. Any of those things that we just saw on that video are happening. Your heart rate increases, and you get stuck in this, or if you're in fight, this is where domestic violence happens. Somebody is triggered, into something that happened to them earlier in life, and they go into, their reaction is rage, anger, irritation, frustration. They're the ones who will beat somebody up to protect themselves. And so from an early age, they've learned to fight their way out of something. Now we may go into fight, find out that doesn't work, and dump into flight, want to run, we can't run. So if we're in either one of these, or maybe traveled through both of them, and we feel trapped, I can't fight, I can't flee, I am helpless, I will dump into this, freeze or immobility. And so freeze or immobility is, it's just what it says. You often feel like you sometimes paralyzed. You can't move, you can't speak, you can't run, you can't fight. There is a sense of helplessness, hopelessness, shut down. It's actually a preparation for death. This is where we experience depression. It's and a sense of just total helplessness. And so we can dump into this and live. This is where dissociation happens also. So if we're here and we can't fight or flee, we freeze and we get stuck here. And when we're stuck here, we still have all of the fight or flight chemicals running through our body. So we're still trapped in the cortisol, the adrenaline, and all of those things are still coursing through us, even though we're in this collapsed mode. Heather.
I just was making a connection to like relationships, marriages or what have you, and patterns of like triggering each other and getting, numerous times getting into fight mode. And sometimes maybe you can get into flight mode and one of you wants to leave. And then after so many times, you just realize that fight or flight doesn't work. So then you go into freeze mode. And you just like, you numb out because you're like, well, I know when we fight about this, it doesn't work. I know when I try to leave, it doesn't work. So now I'm just going to go numb and just freeze. To me, it was an interesting connection to relationships and like patterns and dysfunctional relationships.
Yep. And the thing is what if we both knew what was going on? What if we recognized, oh, she's in flight. Honey, come here, sit down. Let's talk. I can tell you're scared. What difference? How would that help? That's the empathetic witness coming alongside us. But too often, we're both trapped in fight or flight. And we trigger each other then, and we both go deeper into our own thing and just make it worse. And I just want to emphasize that all of this happens instantaneously. It's not like you can say this trigger, this lightning bolt comes and you're like, oh, well, I'm not going there. You're hijacked. You're taken for a ride against your will. And think about it. If you have been in, as a child, if you've been had developmental trauma, where as a child you constantly felt like your life was threatened and you were trapped and you couldn't get away, that is going to be, your body gets so that it automatically just goes to that place. So today I experience something that is remotely resembles what I went through as a kid, and I'm gonna barely even touch these, and I'm gonna dump right into freeze, immobility, dissociation, depression. That my body takes me there. And in your handouts, there is a handout that has a lot of those things that are on that little video that tell you the symptoms of or what happens to your body when you go into fight or flight. But I think we've covered enough of that here that I just encourage you to read your handout concerning that. It's called Fight, Flight, Freeze handout. I want to look at the symptoms of trauma. And I'll have to see if I hope I have that one pulled up. It says symptoms of trauma in order of appearance. No, of course mine isn't on here. Do you have yours, Tina? I don't know what I did on mine.
Do you want me
So,
to open mine?
yeah, if you want to, go ahead and share that.
Sure. Okay.
And I think it's good to look at this because these are the things that when they're happening to us, this is where you can just notice. Oh, that's a trauma reaction. Huh. And you may not know where it comes from, but don't try to analyze that either. Just notice what's happening. Notice your physiology. And if you want to do anything with it, you take it to the Lord. Lord, I'm noticing this. I'm noticing what's going on in my body. So symptoms of trauma, and it says order of appearance, but there's no neat, clean order that things happen. But hypervigilance is one of the first things that will happen to us in a traumatic situation. And by that just means I'm always looking over my shoulder. I'm always watching for or vigilant for danger. Often if we have PTSD, we're going to want to have our back to the wall and our face to the door or any entrance because we want to see what's coming and going.
Sorry, I just have to make a quick note there. My husband and I always fight over that seat because we both feel that. So like we both need our back to the wall.
That's part of hypervigilance. I worked at with disability services at a college, and one of the accommodations for PTSD was making sure that a student could be seated where they felt safe. And often they would want to be seated in the back row with their back to the wall and facing the entrance. Or they would want to be seated right by the entrance, hopefully with their back to the wall, so that they could make a quick escape. Intrusive imagery or flashbacks. And so that could come in the form of visual flashbacks or dreams. So that you did have that article up there.
Yeah, I know. I just went away. Sorry about that. Here we go.
There it is. So intrusive imagery or flashbacks sometimes will happen in dreams. And I want to tell you, I want to encourage you to don't be afraid of your dreams. We have nightmares and we wake up and we're terrorized by the nightmare. And again, look at a nightmare as your friend. It's telling you there's something unfinished. It's not telling you that this thing is going to happen to you. That God doesn't speak to us that way. He doesn't come in our dreams and terrorize us and tell us this is going to happen to you. What it's saying, that dream is telling you that there's something that is causing this fear or this terror inside of you. And he wants to help you deal with it. So don't be afraid of your dreams. Bettie Mitchell taught me that. I remember being on a trip, we were in Israel, and I had a horrifying nightmare after going through Hezekiah's tunnel with water up to my neck. And then I had this horrifying claustrophobic, gee, I wonder why, nightmare. But But I just remember sitting in the courtyard at this place talking to Betty and her telling me, don't be afraid of your nightmares. They're not they're not premonitions of something that's going to happen. That what they're doing is they're telling you something about yourself and something that the Lord wants to help you deal with. So intrusive imagery or flashbacks, sometimes that comes in the form of one of the most significant ones I worked with was very early in my counseling experience, a woman who said she had a video in her head she could not shut up. She couldn't stop it, and it had been going on for like 2 years since the death of her son. And this night replayed over and over and over until it was driving her insane. It was exhausting. She couldn't sleep. It was terrifying. And so there were a lot of things that we did to work with that. And I had no clue what I was doing, and the Holy Spirit brought what was needed at the time, and the video stopped in her head. So there's, I think, so I just want to say there's hope. These things are not a life sentence, as Peter Levine says. Extreme sensitivity to light and sound. So that's part of the hypervigilance, I think. We're hypervigilant to sound. I know I have a pretty profound startle reflex, probably from my brothers scaring the crap out of me all the time when I was a kid. Hyperactivity, having to be on the move all the time, can't sit still. Exaggerated emotional and startle responses. For me, still loud sounds will just unglue me. And I can't stop it. I can't make that go away. Nightmares and night terrors, abrupt mood swings, rage reactions or temper tantrums, frequent anger or crying. And so these are often abrupt. You're having a pleasant day and then all of a sudden, boom, and it just feels like a fire is lit inside of you. These are all come from previous trauma. Shame and a lack of self-worth. This I can't say enough about. That it was a mystery to me for a long time until I began to understand that what happens, especially, let's say, in a situation where you're being assaulted or violated physically in some way, whether it's sexually and physical abuse, and you can't stop it. And you go into paralysis or shutdown. And then afterwards, you tell yourself, I'm so stupid. How did I let myself be put in this place? Why did I should have screamed. I should have done this. The helplessness is what causes us to go into that shame and sense of worthlessness, is that I should have been stronger. I shouldn't have let that happen. This is my fault type of thing, because we go into freeze and helplessness because we really don't have any other option. Think about a little child. They don't have the power to fight off a bigger human being, and especially if it's somebody who has authority in their life, or maybe somebody they love and respect. The likelihood of a child being able to fight off a perpetrator or to flee and get away is pretty slim. And so that puts us into a sense of helplessness. And then we shame ourselves and we feel like something's wrong with me, I'm bad. So shame and worthlessness are inherent to trauma.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I just keep thinking of Sean was in Kenya with our kids there, and some of them, we know their stories were like horrendous, terrible childhoods, like really a lot of traumatic experiences. And he was talking about this one girl, and he knows her story, and he's like, she's just like such a light, and she's just like, I can't believe she's healed and she's fine. And as he's saying this to me, and I've experienced her as well, she's the sweetest thing, and she seems totally great. But to me, my question was, yeah, but what about 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 30 years from now? Or like, is she really healed? Like, I guess well, I think I know the answer to that. She can seem fine, and she can, or she could be healed, but it's most likely that it might revisit her in the future, possibly.
Yeah, and I don't, that's a good point, because I don't know why these things lay dormant, but they often do. One of the biggest traumas in my life happened when I was 17. I started having panic attacks around it when I was in my 40s. And I'm sure that in between there, I had things that were happening that were related, trauma responses that were related, but I never connected them to it. I never understood that it had anything to do with the original trauma until much later, when I got into Good Samaritan Ministries and had a really good counselor who helped me through the panic attacks, and that the Lord literally showed me the connection between my panic attacks and the accident when I was 17. I never would have made that connection on my own. And he has ways, though. It's interesting that when we get in a place where we are safe and we do have an empathetic witness, that often memories and things come up that never have before. They will surface on a level that they never have before. And I think it's because the Lord puts us in a place where it's okay. It can come up now. You have someone with you. You have someone who can help you or listen to you or walk you through this. Whereas before that, you didn't.
Hey, Cindy.
She's in the
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I was just gonna say, she's in a safe place now, and she can, like, they talk about her childhood or traumatic childhood in front of her, and she's like, I don't know, 10, and she just is like, has a smile on her face. She's like, yeah, that happened to me, and we're just like, oh. Anyway, it's just
And that's pretty
interesting
common
how.
too. That is pretty common, that often in counseling, I see, and I've done this myself, where somebody can just tell the story of what happened and be total emotionally flat, not really engage it on an emotional, physical level at all. And sometimes, in a sense, that is a sign that you are still traumatized by it, because in order to heal from it, you have to be able to engage your physiology, engage the emotions, and engage the thoughts around it and the beliefs in order to be healed. And it's hard, but that often takes having to experience at some level that original trauma in the presence of somebody that can listen to you and help walk you through it and bring Christ into that. But I do think that sometimes that shutdown is God's way of protecting us. I think dissociation is often a way that God protects us, that we may dissociate totally from the memory, or we may just dissociate physically or emotionally from the memory, and that's okay. Let that be until the Lord brings you into a safe place where you can begin to deal with that. Don't try to dredge up memories. But when they come, deal with them. That's when you begin bringing it to the Lord. Sabrina.
I have a quick scenario where I was in counseling with you, and it was a very traumatic experience. I was sexually violated. I was very young, and I have full memory up to a certain point, and then I have lapsed memory and then I have memory again. And through counseling and going through that with you and noticing that the Lord himself was there with me when that happened, it gave me peace and actually joy that the Lord protected my memory, that I don't remember something specifically. And I used to think, well, why can't I remember what, you know, I know I'm not wrong and this and that, and very condemning thoughts. Um, that's given me a real healing and a body peace, a belief peace, a thought peace. So that's just one testimony I just wanted to share with
Yeah.
others. And you, if you want to share, if you have a client or someone, you're welcome to share that
Yeah.
for yourself or for others. Thank you,
Thank you.
Cindy.
Hey, Cindy. I
Celia.
was gonna add to that just kind of what Sabrina was saying as well, but I've gone through some counseling with Cindy for some stuff that was traumatic in my life, and I remember like there were times when we'd be talking and I'd feel like there was all this more I wanted to say, but it wouldn't come to me. And then I remember Cindy praying a prayer over me and asking God to like highlight those things to me and bring anything that had been hidden to the surface. And then I would notice after that, like God would bring me things at the right time that I could handle them. You know, like I'd be at the grocery store and something would just pop up like a memory. But when I look back, I could see how he was preparing me that it wouldn't like, I wouldn't fall apart in the middle of the grocery store, remembering that because I'd had counseling from Cindy and I'd had this and I'd had verses that he brought to mind. And so that's, I think that, yeah, like Sabrina was saying, that's part of it. Like God brings it to you when you're ready to deal with it. Whereas, you know, just talking to Cindy in an hour, maybe I wasn't ready to deal with all of that. And so I couldn't really remember what I was trying to say. Anyway, so yeah, it's just
Yeah.
God is so gentle with us and knows when the time is right for us to deal with things.
He does, and we can trust his timing, and we can trust that if we are triggered into something, he is there with us to help us bring closure to that thing. On this symptom list, then sometimes there's things that are delayed that show up much later. And like I said, the panic attacks, anxiety, phobias, those type of things. I was 17, and when I was in that horrific wreck, and I'm in my 40s, I start having panic attacks. It's like, Lord, why? Why? What was the big lapse? I'm grateful for it, you know, in many respects, but I'm grateful too when he brought, but that was, even though that was a one-time incident, there was so much aftermath with it that it's taken me a lot of different sessions and much inner healing to bring full closure to what happened in that and the aftermath of that wreck. But he knows exactly, you know, some of you remember my story of a couple of years ago getting caught in a snowstorm leaving the office, and I was trapped on the freeway for 11 hours. Boy, that thing triggered massive fallout in me. But I had several days of just really intense being able to experience. I mean, I shook, I trembled, I cried, God took me through memories of things during those few days that were all triggered by that being trapped for 11 hours. And I am so grateful to this day. And those were all things that had been in me for all these years, driving me subconsciously in many ways that I wasn't even aware of. And so, yeah, in the end, I was grateful for that. At the time, it wasn't much fun. So some of these things show up much later, mental blankness or spaced out feelings. One of the things that happens to us in the midst of stress and trauma is that brain fog thing. We can't focus, we can't concentrate, we forget things, and we often think, you know, that, well, I have dementia or I'm losing my mind or something like that. And it's like, no, you've got stress chemicals running through your body that's affecting your ability to remember things or to track well. At one point I'd been through some pretty rough stuff, and I remember sitting down and looking through the photo album at pictures, and it's like, wow, there's pictures of me there and I don't remember being there at all. And it was a vacation, and when I was in my late 30s, and the kids are there with me, and then Terry, and we've got all these pictures of all these fun things. I have no memory of being there because I was so consumed internally with the other stuff that was going on at that time in my life. And so give yourself grace when you have those brain freezes and can't remember things. Or Tina and I've been talking about how we set our phones down and can't ever find them, you know.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Attraction to dangerous situations. I did a lot of that. I had a lot of putting myself in danger after extreme danger. Addictive behaviors, of course, it can be any kind of addiction: overeating, drinking, smoking, sex, whatever. Exaggerated or diminished sexual activity. So this is very common as a traumatic response, either shutting down totally or becoming hyperactive sexually. Amnesia and forgetfulness, just talked a little bit about that. Inability to love, nurture, or bond with other individuals. Trauma often destroys trust. Fear of dying or having a shortened life. Self-mutilation or abuse. So cutting, self-mutilation can show up in many ways. Sometimes scratching, itching, picking on ourselves, pulling hair, many ways. Chewing our fingernails, chewing on the side of our mouth. Many of those things are trauma related. Loss of sustaining beliefs, spiritual, religious, interpersonal, that we begin to question everything that we've ever known, and we've maybe been positive of before. And so then symptoms can and often do, if we are not able to process any of those things, if we're not working through them actively, it's going to turn into physical maladies. And the doctors, science are all in agreement about that now. That these things, it used to be shaming because they'd say it's all in your head or it's psychosomatic. In other words, you're making it up. It's not real. You really aren't sick. And the fact is, you really are sick. These symptoms aren't just made up. They're not hypochondriac. It's not, it's in your head, yes, but it's connected to your body and it's connected to your emotions. And so things around excessive shyness, diminished emotional responses, inability to make commitments, to follow through on things, chronic fatigue, low physical energy, immune system problems, endocrine problems, thyroid malfunction, environmental sensitivities, psychosomatic illnesses, particularly headaches, migraines, neck and back problems. And again, psychosomatic does not mean crazy or that it's made up. It's just that our thinking predisposes us then to these things. Chronic pain, fibromyalgia, asthma, skin disorders, digestive problems, severe premenstrual syndrome, depression and feelings of impending doom, just waiting for the other shoe to drop type of thing, feelings of detachment, alienation, isolation, the living dead feelings, inability or reduced ability to formulate plans. So you can see trauma shows up in a lot of very significant life-altering ways. But what we usually do is condemn ourselves rather than understand that this is a normal reaction to unprocessed trauma. I want to encourage you to read Psalm 38, maybe even in different versions. But to me, any of this stuff that I've studied, I've said, okay, God, where is it in the Bible? Is this true? And he led me to Psalm 38, and it's like, whoa, it's true. It's right here. So you think about these things about we go into the questioning of God, and God, it's your fault, or it's my fault, or I wasn't good enough, or so we have variations of themes around our faith, and we begin questioning things. All of the physical pain that it talked about, the dissociation, the numbing, the isolation, and all of these extremes. I want to read a little bit of this. I won't read the whole psalm, but the whole psalm is someone who's in tremendous PTSD response. O Lord, rebuke me not in your wrath, and chasten me not in your burning anger. So in other words, God's mad at me. For your arrows have sunk deep into me, and your hand has pressed down on me. There is no soundness in my flesh because of your indignation. There's no health in my bones because of my sin. For my iniquities are gone over my head. As a heavy burden, they weigh too much for me. My wounds grow foul and fester because of my folly. I'm bent over and greatly bowed down. I go mourning all day long. For my loins are filled with burning, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am benumbed and badly crushed. I groan because of the agitation of my heart. Lord, all my desire is before you, and my sighing is not hidden from you. My heart throbs, my strength fails me, and the light of my eyes, even that has gone from me. My loved ones and my friends stand aloof from my plague, and my kinsmen stand afar off. Those who seek my life lay snares for me, and those who seek to injure me have threatened destruction, and they devise treachery all day long. So you see him going back and forth between God, it's your anger, but then there's my enemies, but listen to not just the emotional pain, the physical, mental, emotional pain that he is suffering. And here's freeze, but I, like a deaf man, do not hear, and I am like a dumb man who does not open his mouth. And I'm like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth there are no arguments. Shut down. And then he goes into part of the remedy of the coming out of it. For I hope in thee, O Lord. You will answer, O Lord my God. For I said, may they not rejoice over me, who, when my foot slips, would magnify themselves against me. But then he goes back into, for I'm ready to fall, and my sorrow is continually before me. For I confess my iniquity. I'm full of anxiety because of my sin. So, and this is just one example. This is one reason I love King David, is he's very, very transparent about what he's experiencing and what he's going through. But this is a man, you know, even in Psalm 39, he goes on to say, I was dumb and silent. I refrained even from good, and my sorrow grew worse, and my heart was hot within me. While I was musing, the fire burned. Can you relate to some of this? These are all symptoms of someone in extreme stress and trauma. And David also is a tremendous example of coming out of that. And we'll look at that in the days to come. I'm not going to go into that healing process right now, but just know you're not alone, and that this is not a unique experience to us, but mankind has experienced this throughout history. And you can think of David, and what would it be like to be in hand-to-hand combat, killing people with swords and knives and arrows, watching your comrades fall around you. That he experienced unfathomable trauma in his life. Think about when he was hiding in the caves for years from King Saul. And so the Bible has a whole lot to say, not only about the fact that this trauma response is normal, but also that God is with us in the midst of it. And that there is hope. It's not a life sentence. And we'll be looking at David more as we look at some of the processing through these things and coming out of them. Today, I want to finish with just showing you a couple of examples of trauma response and how even in animals, one of them is, you saw the kitty that came up on the screen. This video of the kitty is one where this kitty is set watching an old horror movie, and the cat doesn't have any idea what's going on, but the sounds, and there's something in the cat that senses the danger in this, in just watching this video. And I want you to think about that when there's a proverb that says, be careful what you watch, what you see with your eyes. Guard your eyes, because we are so exposed to violence on our TVs, and not just violence, but horrific, vulgar, awful murder, death, all these things that horror movies and stuff that we notice when you watch a movie, what's happening in your body. It is as though you are there experiencing that. And I think this kitty is a prime example of that. All right, I got to find which direction. There he is, right there. And remember how in that one little video it said that the pupils will dilate to let in more light during trauma response. So watch this kitty's eyes especially. So, so you watch that kitty, think about yourself. That kitty was not processing things, trying to figure out what it was watching. It was reacting in a fight or flight, obviously a flight response to the movement, the sounds. It detected danger. The other one, I'm just going to show briefly. Fear immobility cycle happens when there is something dangerous happens. We don't escape from whatever it is, so we're trapped and we experience fear and helplessness. And as a result of the fear and helplessness, we become immobilized, or they call it tonic immobility. And then in a good situation, we're going to be, our body's going to be able to tremble, to shake, to have deep heaving breaths that begin to regulate our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and then we go back to an aroused state and are able to escape. So ideally, that's what needs to happen to us, is we need to be able to shake off all of the traumatic chemicals that are in our body, and then be able to escape. And if we did, then we would remain healthy. And so, like I said early on, animals in the wild do not get PTSD because they are able to, either they die or they escape. Animals in captivity do, because we trap them. I worked as a vet assistant for a while, and one of the things I noticed, and I knew nothing about any of this at the time, was that we would do a procedure on an animal and then put them in the kennel. And when they're coming out of anesthesia, they'd start trembling and shaking and flopping all over, and basically get very hysterical. And then they couldn't run, they couldn't escape, they couldn't go anywhere, and they would collapse. And they'd become very calm, and we thought that was good. But what happened is they went into the freeze mode. rather than being able to escape. So I'll show you one more clip here. And this is of an impala who actually does escape. And you will see this impala go through a phase of massive, violent trembling and shaking, deep heaving breaths. All of that is part of the parasympathetic nervous system coming in and regulating again. And so look at this impala. There's a close-up. I mean, it looks like it's dead. A hyena comes in and scares the cat away. I mean, look at how totally limp it is. Yeah, I don't know what the time lapse here was, but I just noticed its eye moved just a little bit right there. Now you see the breathing start. But up until that time, you wouldn't think that thing was even alive. And so it's in what they call collapsed immobility. And this is by God's design. So it was chased down by a cat, caught, trapped, went into collapsed immobility, which means it felt no pain. This is what we won't let ourselves do, because trembling and shaking is a sign of weakness.
Hey,
And
Cindy,
yeah,
I heard something kind of neat last week, and I was gonna try it. I haven't, like, if something traumatic happened, but this lady who's a psychologist was saying that one of the ways we can force our body to release the trauma, like the somatic release or whatever, is to do like a wall sit for a long time until, like, after something traumatic happens, and then it forces your body to start shaking and release all that tension. But I was looking forward to trying that next time something traumatic happens.
yeah, there is actually I'm looking at my bookshelf because I have a book on that very thing. I don't know if I have it in here, but yeah, they call it trauma releasing exercises. And so you can go through these trauma releasing exercises and you lay down on your back. And I do it all the time. I use this a lot. We had a guy that came to GSM and taught it one time, and several of us volunteered to be the guinea pigs. and and so he puts us through these exercises. Some of it was wall sitting, but I don't even have to do any exercises anymore. I just go through my minimal exercises, and I can lay down on the floor and with my feet on the floor, my knees bent, and your legs just start trembling. And I've had it where the trembling's gone clear up through my whole body. And I did a lot of that after that snowstorm. But yeah, if you want to look it up, there's YouTube videos on it. Trauma releasing exercise is the name of it. And you can find variations of different people that do it. Like I say, after you've done it for a few times, you don't have to go through all of the exercises that he puts you through. Unless you're in really tremendous physical shape, then you might have to do more. But it really is, I often just lay there and pray. Or sometimes the Lord will bring to me certain memories that I'm processing. Sherry.
Okay. I've wondered about this because sometimes when I'm lying in bed, sometimes it has to do with going through in my mind things that are just like weighing heavy on me. There are some times that my body starts to shake, and I don't know what's going on. So when I remembered back to watching that poor gazelle. Well, no, good gazelle, because it woke him, it helped him get out of the trauma cycle. So I just figure, I guess I'm supposed to do this. So I just let it happen. And it does, I do notice that after it happens that my brain kind of shuts down or relaxes and I can go to sleep. So I assume
Yep.
it has something to do with that.
Yep. Yep. I've had a number of people that have shared with me how they've always, they've started feeling that trembling. And because we've taught this in class, it's like, okay, I'm just going to go with it. And sometimes it's surprising how long it will continue, but I'll sometimes in the night, if I'll wake up, or even in the morning, I'll wake up and I'll just feel this quivering inside of me. And it's kind of like, okay, don't know what it's about, but I'm just gonna feel that. I'm gonna let it happen. And it's your body releasing chemicals. So go with it. Don't be ashamed of it. And that's, the emergency rooms used to even always give medication to stop that. And it's like, it was one of the worst things in the world they could do, because people needed to, well, they're going into shock. No, they're already in shock and they need to tremble to come out of it. You need to not stop that. But we have a lot of ways. How do you stop the trembling? Think about it. Hold your breath, tighten your muscles,
Stuff it, whatever you're feeling.
stuff it. Yep. And what that does is it just stores it deeper in our nervous system. So, that I remember Peter Levine advising us that you get in a minor fender bender or a close call on the highway or something in a car, find the first place you can to pull over and just sit and let yourself tremble and feel it. And then you're going to be less likely to be traumatized by it. Okay, that we covered a lot of information today. So any thoughts, comments, questions in closing? Okay.
Do you have a preferred handout for the trauma releasing exercises?
I
In your
don't have a handout for it. I would just
Okay.
recommend going to YouTube and putting in trauma releasing exercise. There is also a book on it. And it's just a little short book that takes you through the exercises and tells you how to do it. So you can look that up on Amazon or whatever. Like I say, I have a copy of it somewhere and I'd show it to you if I could find it. But yeah, you feel kind of goofy doing it. My husband's used to it now. When I'm laying on the floor shaking, he doesn't even bother me.
I was just gonna make a comment about something that was said earlier. The like self-harm. I always think when I'm like having a bad few days or week or whatever, and I know I'm just like processing something, and then I won't work out and I won't eat right. I won't do all the things that I need to do. So it's like a type of self-harm in a way, I guess. Like I won't do all the things that I know I should be doing to help myself. That was interesting.
And I think some of that, Heather, it may be that you're going into that freeze.
Mm. Oh yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Okay, who'd like to close in prayer today? I love to watch the body language when I ask this.
I will.
Okay, thanks, Sherry.
I don't mind. Lord Jesus, we just thank you today for all this information, God. We thank you that you made our bodies wonderful to do things that can seem harmful, but really, God, there was a purpose for it in the beginning. So, God, I just ask you that you will help us to take this information into our minds, into our hearts, and to be able to help others and ourselves, Lord God, to focus on you and bring all these things to you so that you can direct us to the healing that we need and others need, Lord God. Thank you so much. Thank you so much that we can do this. In your precious name, amen.
Amen and amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so much,
you.
Cindy. Bye.